Thank you, Doris. Thank you for having us. I am Heather Maude. This is my husband, Charles. We're going to walk you through the history of our place, and we're going to walk you through what we have experienced, and kind of back to what Frank said, the fact that at times you can be what the government tells you is an A student, and you can still see the entire train derail. And then we're going to share with you some of the things that we have learned that hopefully are just beneficial to everyone, because it was a long road to learn them, and hopefully they can help some other people.
First of all, we'd really like to just thank you individually and as an organization for all your support that you've given us throughout the last year. A lot of this will be pretty redundant if you were at the RCAF convention, but it's I guess maybe you'll catch something we didn't say, or we didn't say the first time. So to kick off, I guess I'm just going to go through some history. As Heather says, it's my family's problem that we're dealing with, and it is. It's an old problem. If I can direct we have a map up here, and the orange area is the part that the ordeal's been over for the last year. It's approximately 25 acres. This piece of land was acquired in 1910 by my great-great-grandfather and grandmother. They bought it from David Skipton, that he had acquired it from a couple other people that had sold out prior to him that had homesteaded it. So this particular piece of land where it's orange, we own on 3 sides, and on the 4th side is the state of South Dakota or the old river channel. So these are 2 river lots. We came there in about 1907, decided we'd purchase this land here in about 1910. From 1910 to current day, that piece of land has been de-treed, leveled, irrigated, cropped. Almost every crop that we could grow in western South Dakota, we'd put on it. My great-grandpa, he grew vegetables, sold them in Scenic. I mean, it's grew piles and piles of food and feed for our livestock. It is our main feed source comes off that river bottom. In 2020, I guess I'll go back. My great-grandpa in the 1940s put in an irrigation project. He pumped in the teens and the 20s out of the river. Kind of must have been a pretty small project. I'm guessing 10, 20 acre type thing. Then when later on in the 40s, he decided he would dig in an irrigation canal that would collect water from about a mile and a quarter upriver. Big canal. This thing's 15, 20 feet wide in places. And he flooded all the river bottoms. And back when he was there, it didn't matter whether you owned it or the government owned it. You took care of it as your own. And he flooded a lot of these bottoms, and he raised a pile of feed for his cattle. And he had a small place, 600 and some acres. With the Forest Service permit, it was about 1,400 altogether. So, and he raised a family of 6 there. That went on, was used from the 40s to the 60s. 1963, my grandpa took over possession of it. He used the ditch for a few years. The state of South Dakota was starting to really frown on how we took the water out of the river. So he decided to quit fighting the state of South Dakota on that and let go of quit using the ditch, which we had an easement through the Forest Service on the whole time. And quit using that ditch, decided to start pumping water, used a big gun sprinkler. We'd water that whole bottom, which our water permit says that we can water 118 acres as much as we can use. And so we use that on through my dad's generation, and it sat vacant when my grandpa got a little older, about 10 years. We just had dryland hay produced down there. In 2012, I decided I'd resurrect Grandpa's machinery and go back to watering. We watered with his system until the fall of 19, when the big drag hose on our sprinkler sprung a leak. And Heather and I decided, well, we're already facing a labor shortage, trying to expand. I was only watering about half of the river bottom because that's all I could get across. So we decided we put in a center pivot. So in 2020, we started the work on putting in the center pivot. It covers 55 acres. Through that whole process, we looked into FSA financing for it. Time that was all said and done with, that really didn't work for us very well. And so then we went ahead and got private funding, put that in, and our first crop we raised was in 2021. We were just going on about life, I guess, until March 29th of this past year, 2024. Special Agent Travis Lunders and Captain Summers came to our house on which was Good Friday, caught us at home. They said that there was a supposed deer hunter complaint about a trespassing sign that's just off this side of the picture at the top of the river breaks, where my grandpa had in 1993 jogged a fence around the top of a big draw. Halfway down this road coming into this river bottom, it changes from Forest Service to private land. Back then, he put a sign up on the top of that hill that he didn't want people going halfway down that hill. There is nowhere turning around. It is a 2-track carved out of the side of the river breaks. So you have to go clear to the bottom or not go at all. So anyways, we wanted to stop a lot of this traffic up on top. We didn't tell them they couldn't go hunt it or anything like that. We were just trying to keep the traffic down from tearing up their hill and ours. So anyhow, this trespassing sign was an issue. This was on March 29th, and while he was visiting with us that day, we learned that he had been working on this most of the winter. Put down there, he told us he trespassed on our land, went to look at water tanks, looked at the center pivot, things like that. But Heather took good notes that day, and that is one thing you really want to do, either record it or take notes. So he had walked around, looked around, whatever. He had the mentality that he could do anything he wanted to do, go anywhere he wanted to go because he was a special agent. But the conclusion of that meeting that day was that we needed to meet with our district ranger, and she was ultimately the person that could make the decision on what to do with this whole issue. That was proposed for May 1st then. So on May 1st, we met with the district ranger, Julie Wheeler. Travis was there, of course. During our whole meeting, we suggested maybe trading some land. Right south of this picture, we have 19 acres that lay within the Forest Service on their side, the fence that they've been managing forever. And we suggested, well, maybe we just trade use. Trade land, whatever we got to do to make this deal work for both of us. We even suggested a special use permit at the time, which they didn't want to hear of. But no matter what the resolution was, we had to have a survey done. And Julie told us that day that to survey this was going to probably take as much as 2 years to occur. 5 days later, Travis Lunders came with his survey crew and surveyed this property. On May 6th and 7th, they notified us that they were going to be on our property doing surveying. And, we really didn't have any problem with the survey crew. It was the cop that we knew that he was just digging more evidence against us. So at that time, we started calling our elected officials, trying to get them involved in this deal, because we had found out since the May 1st meeting already that, that a lot of this is going to have to be done through a congressional resolution, a congressional bill. It's going to have to be attached to something to get a trade done, land purchase, use the Small Tracts Act, whatever the angle to straighten this mess out was going to have to be done through that. So we reached out to Mike Rounds, which we'd had some connection through church and the community with some of his staff here in Rapid. So it was fairly easy to come up with that. So we were working, trying to maybe go down the road of using the Small Tracts Act, whatever that looked like. And so nothing was really going on. We were supposed to meet on scene, look at it with Julie and Travis and whoever else was there. Mike or Jim Selcher wanted to be there also. And but we couldn't make it work on June 20th. We canceled that deadline or that date with them, and continued to try to work to get one after the 4th of July. So on June 24th, I'm working on stuff in the yard, trying to get everything going to put up some more hay or whatever, and Travis calls. He has some paperwork for us that he needs to drop off with us. I said, well, just bring it to my house. I'm here. So Heather didn't want me home alone by myself with a cop, and that is the number one thing to remember, too, is don't ever be there by yourself with a cop, because you'll always be the losing person. And so she had our neighbor come over just to be there as a witness. So we're standing there. Travis rolls in. He gets out of his pickup in a kind of a weird fashion. Honestly, he made his cop friend that was with him get out first and in case I was going to attack him. And then he gets out of the backside with the indictment papers to show us. He indicted both Heather and I to theft of government property on 4 counts. And that, in fact, Frank Guzman, I called him on the phone while Travis was there, and Travis got a little upset that he was having to explain it to someone else. And he was upset that I was questioning him how this came to be and why this was this way. But that indictment was for 10 years in prison and $250,000 fine apiece. And so from indictment day, which was already had been wrote for, I can't remember, but he'd probably wrote it 4 or 5 days ago. So we had already lost some time on this before he ever delivered it to us. Our indictment hearing was on July 8th. We had the holiday in the middle of that. We had to find lawyers. We had to have child custody papers done in case, because at our hearing they could keep us. They could keep us in jail. We had to have alternative care for our children. So we sold some cows in Fort Pierre on that sale just before that. We scraped us enough money to get Heather a lawyer, which came recommended by Minnie out of Pierre, and but we were having a hard time finding a second. So we decided we'd just get through the indictment hearing with who I had. We gave the good one to Heather. Mine came recommended as a fair appointed lawyer. So we got through the indictment hearing. They took our guns away. We had to do I should repeat that. They did not take our guns away. The court. The court said you need to get rid of them. You cannot have them in your possession. So we sent them away, and then we couldn't talk about the case. Heather and I couldn't talk to each other. And at that point, that just became really tough, because that's the elephant in the room. No matter where you go, whether it's the bedroom, the kitchen, it didn't matter where it was, the elephant was in the room. And but that kind of closed down as much as we could. But we decided that we were going to fight a long time ago, because this needed to be straightened out. this needed to be fixed somehow. But so then the fundraising started. Some of you people in this room were part of that, and that helped us to get a second lawyer for me. And by say the middle of July, maybe the first part of August, I had a lawyer from here in Rapid that was able to represent me. But we were having a hard time finding a lawyer that knew how to handle a criminal land case. Land cases are not criminal. Land cases are civil. And civil cases you can easily find lawyers almost anywhere that's willing to take that on. But they didn't know. Still to this day, I do not think our lawyers knew what they signed on to, because they were struggling. Even at the end when they dropped the charges, they were struggling to understand how they were going to fight this criminal land case. And people started rallying after July 8th. Social media got going, media got a hold of it, and it turned into where people were starting to know what was going on. And we immediately had calls from everywhere, from every person, almost every state in the union, almost, and other countries, Australia, Canada, England. It was pretty amazing. But I'm going to turn this over to Heather. She's going to get into the nitty-gritty. And you know the one that probably done a lot of that. And I just tried to keep the branch going, and she fought the government.
Yep, so as Charles mentioned, as this was all coming together in the week prior to our indictment hearing and then immediately afterwards, you have to make a decision. And I bet all of you would be equally surprised if you found yourself facing criminal charges. We had no idea really what that meant. Kind of felt like the floor had been swept out from underneath of us. And both the government and the criminal court system do a fantastic job of making you feel guilty until proven innocent, and as though you should be ashamed of yourself for simply landing in that position. But we gave this a lot of thought, a lot of prayer, and we knew we had done nothing wrong. We did not initiate any of this. We had not changed any management practices on this place for generations. All that had changed was the method in which the water was applied to the land. So we considered all of this, and the government brought this and said, this is now an issue we need to resolve. And then it was the government that decided, I guess instead of resolving it, we will just destroy you. And this is the hardest part for me. I got to walk across that field. Think about the most important historic piece of property you own. That's where this happened. And I'm the woman that got to walk across it with him when they surveyed out across a planted crop, right? T-posts, federal boundary, please do not cross. And then 2 weeks later, they try to put me in prison for 10 years, and I have a 7 and a 9-year-old child. So they tried to, from my perspective, they sought to destroy our farm and ranch. And then they decided they'd go ahead and destroy our family also. And that's simply unacceptable. And I'm simply not the kind of person that you're just going to do that to without a fight, and neither is Charles. We may approach this differently. But that was unacceptable, and we had done no wrong, so we chose to stand up and fight in the ways that we could. And that took a lot of prayer and a lot of faith. But the good Lord brought this to us. We know that. It'd been the exact same way for 114 years. And we're the ones that got to walk through this. So we compiled our family history. When I became Mrs. Maude, I found out that the Maudes haven't ever thrown a document away. Charles' grandpa had a shoebox for every year in the basement where I wanted to put the laundry room, so we had a bedroom for a kid. And I got to go through every one of those boxes, and I just happened to keep anything from the bank, anything from the government, and his record books that he had that showed what he had grown and raised each year. And 12 years later, this hits, and I go find that box that I compiled what I decided to keep in, and there is the incomplete, almost complete history of the Maude's interaction with the Forest Service, 100% of which was positive. Nobody has ever had that, is what our government and elected officials have told us. Everybody throws that away, but thanks to Charles' family, we had it. So I've compiled all of that chronologically into a 3-ring binder. We started researching the laws and what our rights were and went down a ton of rabbit holes. We found out that our FSA loan officer provided information between herself and us to the Forest Service special agent without our knowledge. And we found out that while the FSA very, very strongly discourages that and actually has stuff in place that says you need to let the customer know when you are sharing their communication with a third party, since they're both under the umbrella of the USDA, it was actually fine. So we went down a bunch of those rabbit holes and found out that a lot of times our information can be shared in ways that we are told, oh no, we wouldn't do that without talking to you, but in reality, there are ways that it can be shared if they're under the same government umbrella particularly. Researched a bunch of that. We could not do press. However, I think a lot of people recognize this as the precedent-setting issue it was. This organization was one of them that said something to the effect of, you know, this is going to be the precedent-setting private property rights issue of a generation. And we thank you guys for recognizing that and for not being afraid to stand up and say that, both as individuals and as an organization. Because when something like this knocks on your door, you are the people that have to walk through it, but we would not have made it without all of the support of our friends, our family, our neighbors, all the ways in which they supported us and spoke when we could not. We researched attorneys, you know, and our real life didn't stop. This would ebb and flow. You know, the press would pick it up and you can't talk to them, right? But they would call. We would get days that our answering machine would be full. And I remember one time it was 30 below zero. We managed to nail the 30 below zero this last spring with the AI bred heifers. So you would fight the government all day and you would check heifers all night. And it was just like, this is wild. And in February of 2025, our daughter broke her leg. And this is why I can remember this. Nothing happened for 2 months. It was just dead silent for the entire time she was in a cast. There were no phone calls. Nobody, you know, we had Harriet Hageman and Senator Rounds and some other people in D.C. that were working on this, and it was just like it just went silent. And, you know, we were kind of seeking direction, and in March I just felt led to just try to challenge it one more time. So I called everybody up again and asked, you know, where are we at? Is there anything going on? Is there anything we can do? And another round of media broke out, and it just went really, really viral that time. And 1 year to the day, March 29th, 2025, we were asked to provide all of our history and information and communication to Secretary Rollins. So we compiled that and sent that up via Harriet Hageman's team to be sent to Secretary Rollins. And it just continued to snowball at that point. On Wednesday, April 23rd, and this would happen, and I'd give everybody 2 chances, but I was told, you need to call this guy named Brett Tolman. I'm like, okay. So I did, and he didn't answer. So I wait about a week, and somebody else says, you know, you really need to call this guy. So I call him again, and he doesn't answer. But on April 23rd, he calls me back. And he's a former U.S. attorney from Utah, and he's worked up in the D.C. level of government since the Bush administration. And he goes, Heather, I just have a couple of questions. Did you guys build this fence in question in your lifetime? And I said, no. The Forest Service records state that it was built in 1950. That's the first time they had submitted records to his family. So the youngest this fence is built in 1950. He goes, okay. And am I reading this correctly that we have the general government BS with some big egos potentially involved? And I said, well, I'm not supposed to talk about it, but I guess I'd consider it fairly accurate. And I said, well, you should know that we've just sent a lot of information up to the Secretary of Agriculture. And he goes, this is USDA. This gentleman's not a land attorney. And I said, yeah. And he goes, oh, Brooke and I are friends. Great. Good to know. So we talked several times that day. That's Wednesday. Friday the 25th, he calls to tell us that the charges have been dropped. Criminal and civil charges have been dropped. Let's just be quiet. Let this walk down through the chain. And I said, well, can I tell our mothers? Right? And he said, yeah, you can tell your mothers. And I said, okay. So that's Friday. Saturday, we brand. Sunday, we're sitting there with that post-branding cup of coffee, you know, kind of dazed. We all know what that day is like. The kitchen's a wreck. And he texts me and says, hey, you guys have your tickets to D.C.? And I said, no. I don't. And he said, well, you're coming to D.C., and you're doing a press conference with the Secretary of Ag for this. And I'm like, okay. So we funded our trip to D.C., booked all of that on Sunday and Monday, flew out Tuesday, and as we're getting there, we find out that they are trying to bring a civil case against us. And we don't know what this means. And to us, this feels like we just went from court A to court B at the same horrible game, right? Tuesday was awful. You've got 2 kids that have just flown for the first time. They're completely amped. You're in a little box in the middle of D.C. I was a genius and didn't find one with a pool. So Tuesday was rough. Wednesday morning we get up and we're just hammering this attorney on the way to this press conference about these civil charges. And he's finally like, I don't think the 2 of you realize what you have done. And we're like, well, no, this feels like the same old fight just starting over again. And he said, 90, 95.
95% of cases.
95% of criminal cases are prosecuted in some way. Only 5% are ever dismissed. So you 2 have just accomplished what is basically considered impossible. And you need to pause and celebrate that. And then we continue our work. And we said, oh, okay. And he said if they should be able to bring a civil case, you don't lose your rights like you do in a criminal case. You can go back and forth. And it's, to him, it was a much lesser issue. And we said, okay. So we attend the press conference. You may have seen it. A lot of people did. We appreciate that. So many people reached out to us, and we thank you for that. And then from the moment we stepped off that stage until today, not much has changed. And what that means is we are not facing a civil case at this time. The criminal is gone, so we are facing no charges, but we are still attempting to resolve the issue, because when they brought a criminal case against us, at that point, the ability to resolve was tabled until the criminal component was completed. So we are now back to, we have this issue of this potential boundary not being on the line, and how do we resolve it? And we are also back to, the government is who said this needs resolved now. And so we are hopeful that they will now be responsible in following through in resolving that with us. But we have not touched the land since last May. Yep. So we're on year 2 without our feed base. And we remain in good standing with the U.S. Forest Service. We still have not seen the initial complaint or the name of the hunter who supposedly turned in the no trespassing sign. We remain with 0 infractions on our record with the U.S. Forest Service, 0 written notifications of any issue, frankly, 0 verbal statements that we are in the wrong in any way. Never told us to quit, just strongly suggested that we not use it, and never gave us anything in writing. So just in good faith and attempting to be the type of people you would want to do business with, we have respected the general process that you don't use it until it's resolved. We use our allotment in the winter. We used it as we normally would in December, January of 2024 and 2025. We have communicated with them regarding this coming winter. We normally get everything solidified after we preg check. All seems well. And yet we are still sitting here footing the bill for this and trying to get it resolved. And it is still just quite something, very unbelievable, even as the people who went through it. And here are some things to kind of, as we begin to wrap it up, some of the things that we have learned, and Charles has touched on some of this. Know your rights for documenting and recording meetings. In South Dakota, you can record any conversation as long as you're one member of it. And I'm telling you what, I would do that. We recorded our May 1st meeting. That has been and will continue to be of great value in proving the validity of what we stated that day. Take notes. All communication and agreements, either official or unofficial, try to do those in writing. Email is writing. And Frank also mentioned this. If nobody replies to your email in disagreement, that is acceptance of what occurred in that email. Keep your own records. Again, Jim Seltzer with Senator Round's office, I took him our binder of all our 3 generations of working with the Forest Service without, like I said, a single issue. And he said, nobody has this. I have never seen this. So keep them. Put them in a 3-ring binder somewhere. Hopefully you never need them, but you may. You may, your grandson's wife may. Good attorneys can be a real challenge. There are exceptional attorneys out there. Don't settle for a poor one. Keep hunting until you find a good one that specializes in what you need help with. Assume the best, right? Work towards these relationships. Assume the best. Charles is really good at that. But act as if it's going to be the worst. You know, take the notes. Tell them, we're going to record this. Just assume that you're going to be up here talking about this next year, because I will tell you that Charles is a pretty easy guy to get along with. Nobody says that about me, but they say that about him. And he's the one with the Forest Service permit. And everybody says, you are the last guy I would have ever expected this to happen to. And here we sit. And it is not over. You know, and lastly, I don't know how you would get through anything in ag, but particularly this without faith. And that's a big part of this for us, our faith in God and the number of people who prayed for us. We thank all of you that did this. And then as I stated towards the beginning, if something like this if you're ever presented with it, nobody can walk through it for you, right? It's going to face you. But we thank our industry as a whole and on every individual basis, because without the support and just the caliber of people in this room and beyond that backed us in all the different ways that you did, and I don't want to list individual people because there's a ton of you in here and I don't want to forget anyone, but we wouldn't have made it here, you know. We have friends in the media that they never even hesitated because they knew us and they covered this. And we have neighbors at the face of their own persecution with the exact same people who stood up and supported and defended us, you know. Our parents showed up, and Liz May and several of you legislators came along and toured it, and our parents hosted that. You know, and I said this in an interview, we are the American dream, and we all know what that takes to make that work in ag. It's not an easy road, but it's a worthy road. And people saw that, and they saw this for the attack on the American dream. And I think that people fell in behind us, not only because it was Charles and Heather Maude, but because they saw our friends and our family and our neighbors and all of the good that this brought out. So good can come out of these hard situations as well. And we just hope that you will continue to support us and help us hold the government accountable to obtaining a resolution to the issue they decided this is the time, this needs to be brought forth and resolved, and just help us in reminding them that that is their responsibility. So we thank you. If there is time, we'll take questions, but I don't know. That's up to Doris.